We're joined today by one of my favorite people in Brazilian journalism, Mauricio Savarese, author of A to Zico, an alphabet of Brazilian football. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Good to see you again.
Great to see you again.
Very much.
There's a lot to talk about here, and I guess I would start with just the very basic question. Is Brazil ready for the World Cup?
Well, in its own way, it's kind of ready. I would say that the airports are not as finished as they should be. I just came back from Belo Horizonte, and the scenes I saw there were kind of dreadful. Same as in Salvador, kind of difficult as well. But I suppose the basic things that are more important to the tournament, they can do fairly nicely, including the stadia, including the roads to the stadia as well.
How do Brazilians feel about the World Cup right now?
Well, as I said before, not much has changed. We're still very bipolar. People are very negative at first, and then they get into the mood and get too defensive sometimes to defend the World Cup and to defend Brazil in a way that sometimes is almost in denial of the things that are wrong in Brazil as well. My impression is that the mood has slowly setting in, especially in the Northeast and in cities which have never hosted big sporting events before. In Rio, it has pretty much the same atmosphere because of the tourists going to Rio and such a touristic city for everyone. But if you look at the southern cities like São Paulo, even Porto Alegre and Cuiabá, which have had difficulties with construction, and specifically in São Paulo because of the metro strike we've had, and that has kind of broken the mood as well.
Now, last year there were big protests here during Confederations Cup, 1.5 million Brazilians in the streets in various cities around the country. Are we going to see protests on that scale again?
I think that scale is very unlikely, but the protests have changed as well. Nowadays we have more unionized protests, and unionized protests also mean that you can actually negotiate with the leaders and come to a reasonable solution. That has happened with the homeless people in São Paulo who have reached an agreement with federal government. In a way, it has happened with the metro strikers as well. We still have the anti-World Cup protests too, but they have shrunk so much from last year, and if you see the unionized protests, they could have taken like 20,000 people to the streets, and the anti-World Cup protests, they take 1,000, 2,000 tops. I think there are going to be protests in the World Cup, and we have to watch very closely whether we're going to have the black bloc tactics coming back into action. But so far it seems that the big scare is not in the picture at the moment.
Now, there are 12 venue cities for this World Cup in Brazil, and FIFA only required 8. So why are there so many?
Well, they say it's because of tourism, and but that's not the real issue. The real issue is politics. Back in 2009, when the bidding process was still going, some cities which held key politicians had a stronger bid than other cities which didn't have as great politicians with a great future in Brasilia or in national politics. So I would say some of the host cities like Cuiabá, Manaus, probably Curitiba as well, they needed some help, some political help to actually get to host the World Cup as well. And that's the only reason why it was so inflated. We know we could do that with 10 or with 8, but 12 seem to have a better political framework around it.
This year is an election year in this country for the presidency. Dilma Rousseff, the current president, will be running again. Is there any chance that the influence of this World Cup and the result could impact that election?
I think the result that really matters in the World Cup for her re-election or not is the fact that she needs to pull out a nice World Cup. It has to be properly organized despite all the glitches and the problems we've had in the last few years. If Brazil wins the World Cup, but the organization turns out to be a disaster, she's not going to do well in the polls and she might lose re-election. But if Brazil loses and it's a nice tournament, I think she has a nice chance for re-election as well.
On the field, the Brazilian team is the favorite to win this World Cup after winning the Confederations Cup last year. However, Brazil won the previous couple of Confederations Cups and did not win the World Cup the following year. How are the fans feeling? What's their mood right now?
Well, I suppose people have mixed feelings about the Brazilian national team as well. As I said, we are very bipolar. If Brazil wins the World Cup with this team, everyone's going to say it's one of the greatest teams ever. But we know that it's too young, too inexperienced. Fred is probably the worst center forward Brazil has had since '84. Julio Cesar plays in Canada, and that speaks for itself. I'm sorry for that joke. But the midfield is not fantastic. Brazil is going to rely very heavily on Neymar and their defense because the defense is really, really good. They know that they can win the World Cup, but they know that Germany can also win the World Cup. Spain can do that. Argentina can do that. Some surprise team can come in the middle of the way like Italy. I would say people are confident, but they know that this is not the best Brazilian team ever.